getting his fishing boat ready or something. Okay, let's call the meeting, Planning Commission for April 11th, 2023. To order. First item is to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Emery, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Second item on the agenda is the minutes of the March 14th, 2023 meeting. And
Also,
got them?
motion to accept.
Okay, we have a motion from Emery. We have a second.
I wasn't here.
Then I'll second it.
Okay.
There you go.
Rick, again. So we've got a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, council action, there was none. So item number 4 is easement information, possible code changes. We've got some different cities that have different types of views on easements. Do you want to walk us through that, Mark?
Sure. So so Ashley did a little research and got these together. I know when you read them through, they're all pretty similar. I mean, they're really all about the same. Obviously nobody allows anything on the easement that would interfere with whatever's below them. And the one thing that's mentioned in ours, which I think is good, talks about that they have to be open from one end of the block to the other, because theoretically if you have an easement at a backyard, I always think about places like Alice Drive, for example. It's a curved area. There's a couple easements that go from one of the streets back to the easement that may have storm sewer in it. But realistically, most 99% of the people are really good, and they'll always just say, do whatever you got to do. I appreciate having electricity and cable TV and water and sewer and all these things, but the city, to protect those rights for those utilities, are supposed to have an open thoroughfare from one block through to the next. If they had to if it's sanitary sewer and they had to get a jet truck through, or if it's electric and they have to get a pretty good sized truck sometimes in to maybe lift a transformer to change it out, boring machines, vac trucks, all those things. So it's really about just keeping that corridor unobstructed so that the stuff that's in there can be installed and maintained. We had just the 2 draft things were very, very minor things that in our easement section, would just in red have, possibly just stating obstructions and fences. And then on the obstructions piece of the code in the 92075 section, that we could add easements to the basically the same category as a street or a public way, as far as defining where an obstruction should not be. So those were just the 2 suggested minor additions. One thing I did really like that some of these had is the kind of handout information for people to show them what is an easement and what are they really for and how do they need to be maintained. So I guess that's kind of the extent of the research. Should we be?
Yeah, I like the Shakopee one,
I do too.
where it's got that last paragraph on there.
Yep, I had the same thing.
That the
Yeah.
whole thing about
And
Shakopee.
it'd be maybe
was
nice to incorporate that, into the easement, and then the city of East Grand Forks kind of spells it out a little bit, better as well on their second page of the handout there. To keep the easements free from hazard structures, other improvements which might hinder the city's ability to serve and maintain such utilities. Then it also advises people that if you're building a fence or structure, or if you plan on planting a tree, please be advised that no fence or structure can be built in a utility easement nor the planting of any trees. So to me, it just provides more clarity. So I think we can incorporate that in there if you guys so desire.
So is there ever a way for a property owner to be able to build a fence where it might touch an easement, as long as there's a way that you could actually access through that fence, whether it was in a gate or in a section that could easily be removed. Because like looking at Shakopee's, they talk about how, the property owner will be given basically a reasonable amount of time to remove the obstruction. And I'm assuming this would be in relation to if they had to access that easement or to do any work there, so, and that's, I guess, the way I'm reading it from Shakopee. So it looks like there is a way with written permission that a landowner could, in some area, some way, if they had a fence that they wanted to put up, but there does happen to be an easement there, that maybe they can do it with proper permissions. And then if the city does need to access that somehow, that they, if it's a non-emergency issue, they would be let know, and there would be time to get out of their way so that they can get done what they need to get done. Or in an emergency issue, they're just gonna have to just do what they have to do, and then it's up to the property owner to take on that own expense for himself. But I guess that's just a question I had too, because when I was looking at even like under obstructions, I guess, adding that easement in with the instructions, and then when I read the last line, it talks about how an electrical cord or device of any kind is included in an obstruction. So if a person for some reason had an electrical cord going across the easement, it looks like in this way, in some way, it can actually be a misdemeanor to have electrical cord just thrown across there, even if it's maybe a temporary thing or maybe an accident. But just the way I see in the wording, it's like somebody could actually be charged with a misdemeanor for an extension cord. You know what I mean?
That one struck me as kind of odd, that
does
statement
sound
about an
odd.
electrical cord.
Electrical
Right.
cord sounds stupid. But it also says different places where that the city gives them time to remove something, and if they don't remove it, then it will be removed at the person's expense. I think that there's one part in Shakopee that has something at the very last paragraph, and there was something also on the Rosemont at the end, a final note, proper tree or shrub replacement. If it's not done the right way, it's just gonna be removed at the person's expense.
And to
Yeah.
plan for future growth of that tree, because they get a lot bigger than when they started.
And going back to your first question, there is a process where they can apply to the city, for permission to, either put a fence in the easement area, that type of thing. But I think what we take a look at is, what is the width of the easement? Do we really need that much? If the fence is placed here, will we still have full access?
Right.
So,
Because that easement size depends on how deep the stuff is, the utilities are basically,
Yeah.
according to what I was reading, so.
yeah, and sometimes we might get an easement that's way wider than we need, and maybe we have a utility easement, but there's no utilities there. So that might be an occasion where someone could make an application, we could take a look at it, go out there and say, yeah, we'll allow this here, but you have to understand that if we need to get at it, it's gonna have to be moved.
Right, because I think, it's obviously important for the city to be able to access utilities, because that benefits everybody, but it's also, I think, important for a property owner to be able to utilize their property that they own and pay taxes on, everything to the fullest of what they would like to use it for also.
So if you wanted a fence, you just apply for a permit.
Yeah, it's kind of
Encroachment
encroachment permit, and it's
Yeah.
kind of looked at a case-by-case basis.
So it could be on the line even on a property line? Or does it have to be so many feet from the property line?
It would
I don't think a
depend.
fence has a setback rule, does
No,
it?
they don't. I mean, we kind of always tell people that if they put it right on a property line, then technically both landowners would own it. So they
Right.
should have a shared ownership agreement, which nobody does, so.
Yeah, because it's right on the property line, your neighbor can do whatever they want to
Yep.
do to the other side of your fence.
And you have no right to go on the other side to maintain it.
Right, so you want to actually just give yourself enough room to maintain both sides of it.
Yeah,
but-
lawnmower width or something
Yeah.
like that. But if you had a scenario, let's say you had a scenario, a lot of easements in a backyard might be, if it's for power and phone and TV, it could be 5 feet on each side of the property line. So if somebody wanted to fence their backyard and go to that property line, they'd technically be right down the center of the easement then with their fence, which probably wouldn't work out very well. If it was a case where, let's say there was 10 or 20 feet of easement all on their side, and they wanted to fence in their backyard, the kids, whatever, you know, that might be a good case for a encroachment permit, because they would they could put it on the far side of the easement, then they could have, but they might be required to have a gate on both ends.
Right.
You know, but I think that could be handled through the encroachment permit process, but still not really fair. Let's say somebody had a big dog, for example, and Dick's people have to do a locate, and even if there's a gate that they could get in there, they're having to be in harm's way to go and locate or search. Have you had that? I'm sure you've dealt with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm sure there's many scenarios for a lot of things. It's just, I think it's still good to have a way for people to be able to do things with their property, obviously, you know, in a way that doesn't hinder everybody else's rights to use utilities, but also still allow them rights to their
Right.
property and to do what they want to do with it.
And I think that's kind of covered on this obstructions one, where it says, without first having obtained a written permit from the council. And then only in compliance with all respects, terms, and conditions of that permit. So I think there's already a means for that too.
With Shakopee too, it's nice where they list the places you can call to ask questions. Do we have that on ours anywhere? I didn't see it.
Well, I think this is the information they had available, but it's really not out of their city code. It's more of their information that we should probably develop here as well, something like that, aim for a general information sheet. I saw another community had a really nice, not just on easements, but on a lot of their things, the kind of the more common ones, and they had a really nice kind of a QA sort of a deal. It was kind of nice.
Would be not a bad idea then to have the common questions on the website, basically is what you're saying.
Yeah. And maybe some paper stuff for utility billing or so, you know, if somebody has a question, but I know everyone's trying to go paperless, so maybe the website is better, but
So under the instructions, let's say if you had a garage sale, you just had a little temporary garage sale sign up there and it was in the easement. According to this then, would that make that sign not allowed?
Right? Because of the trees and the watering of the trees
I
and the
don't
stuff.
know about on an easement. It probably, I mean, there's a lot of issues with election signs and rummage sale signs, and they're not supposed to be on public right of way, but many of them are.
Like
They're
down the
temporary,
double
they're
lane,
short term.
they're there.
Yeah, they put them on the double lanes on state right of way, and they're really not allowed there.
But if it was easement though, that's on your property, but there's just a utility easement there.
I wouldn't personally consider that a permanent obstruction, I guess, but and it's
Right.
your property. But Delray?
And that's a pretty temporary obstruction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the things that we're worried about. I think it's more having to get access and something that might be blocking that.
Right, yep.
We've always
I guess,
had,
and maybe I'm just focusing on this electrical cord or any device is included, but not by way of limitation within the definition of an obstruction. So that basically almost looks like an obstruction then, you know, because under obstructions is talking about like the street or public property, but when we add the word easement to obstruction, now we're actually adding somebody's property in that, which the easement, the city has a right to that property, but it's still theirs, but the city has that right to go into it to fix things or do what they need to do. So I guess that's why when I start really nerding out on this deeply, you know, when we're adding easement, that word easement under the obstructions part of it, that could open a can of worms to, somebody could get picked on, you know what I mean? Pretty easily, and it would be within the city code to do it. And that's why I ask about, you're just having a garage sale or your kid's graduating and you got that sign up there, but it almost seems like right here now, under the obstructions part of it, that would be not allowed.
or you have a picnic table in your backyard and a crock pot with a cord running to it.
Exactly, yeah.
It kind of feels like, I don't know why, that strikes me as odd that was in our code that,
Yeah.
Because it perfectly makes sense that you don't want to run that stuff upon, over, across, or under a street or other public property. But it's just adding that word easement seems like it really starts to really encroach on that private property owner's, use of their property.
Yeah, and I didn't see that in the other ones. Yeah, I mean, essentially, we're making it a misdemeanor for someone to take their electric hedge trimmer, out across the easement area somewhere.
Right, yeah. Or I can understand where you don't want them to run that across the road, but across the easement, it just seems like we're putting that together with that does really limit things a lot.
Well, the chances that somebody's gonna get approached because they run a cord, an extension cord across the easement, and it's 0 to none.
I understand that, but when we have it as a rule, then if the city council decides to take that as a rule, then, well, now it is
Well, that should,
possible.
something like that probably should be stricken from
I
that.
think it probably should be. I don't know what
Well,
it came into or why, but.
Yeah, but if you look at this one, 92.075, it says obstructions upon, over, across, or under any street. And then we're including easement or other public property. But other public property, I don't know if that necessarily includes easement. But again, to your point, that you can see why you wouldn't want it going across the street or having that stuff
Right.
out there. And
Because it
so I think
almost-
it's more designed for that because we're adding the word easement now, or proposing to.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if maybe we're better off just,
Leaving it in the other piece?
right, not adding easement to this one.
That's what my concern was, is by
Mhm.
adding easement to obstructions, we're really starting to limit somebody's backyard now, or, or a piece of their property that they take care of, that they mow, that they pay taxes on, where obviously makes sense to not be able to do some of these things on a public street or public property, but when it's on the easement, now that's their property.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could put in something that, on a permanent basis, temporarily, it's acceptable to temporarily, with the understanding, for example, you're having a party in your yard and you run the extension cord out to the crop pot, or you've got a pine tree out there that's on the other side of the easement and you want to put Christmas lights on it. You're not gonna leave a cord there forever,
Mhm.
but it's gonna be there just temporarily.
Does it make sense? I mean, that last sentence, does that last sentence really add any value?
I think it's just trying to show that it definitely adds value if you're talking about a street and if you're talking about other public property, but adding the word easement in there kind of seems like it muddies it up.
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't have any problem with just taking that easement out and just leaving this one the way it was.
Okay.
But the whole idea was just to provide some clarity so that,
Right, yep.
people understood, okay, this is the case, so if it,
Yep.
comes up, it's not allowed, but if you want, you can apply for the encroachment permit.
The other thing that's a little, that's always been just a tiny bit gray is the fence thing, because, so a fence isn't, sometimes it's viewed as it's really not viewed as a structure, because there's no setbacks for it, and there's no permits for them unless they're over 7 feet high now, and that's a state requirement for wind load, but, so it's just one that's kind of, that comes up every once in a while. Well, it says it can't be a structure, this is a fence a structure, so, and I don't think fences are appropriate in an easement unless there's an obstruction permit and some, like a gate, or that at least gets looked at,
Right.
Yeah, I think, as far as fences go, if it's by permit, then we have a chance to look at it. And if it's a 30-foot utility easement in the backyard between two houses or something like that, and they want to put a fence 1 foot into it or something like that, so it would leave you with, 29 or 28 feet if both neighbors want to do it. That probably was something that the commission and the council would allow. But if it's a 10-foot easement, they want to drop it in the center, so now you've got 2 5-foot easements, which nowadays isn't enough room for vehicles or anything else to work. That's, that's kind of a non-starter,
Yeah.
so we just need to take a look at it. I think, conditional use permits are wonderful things because it gives everybody a chance to look at it and figure it out, and everybody be happy with it.
Well, because, yeah, in the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of takes away from just getting that hard no,
Mhm.
where there's a possibility of this working,
So those, the encroachment permits, those are issued by Travis, Public Works Director now. So if there's, and the cases where those, we added that maybe 8-9 years ago, because they were, we had a few cases where there would be where fences would show up on a right-of-way. And, sometimes there were some right behind the curb. I mean, right behind the curb. There's no room for snow storage and all that. And so there's a few people that we've had to make them remove their fences. They're not real happy about it. And then there's cases where, I had a call from a lady maybe 3-4 years ago, and she had put a fence up around her yard. She had a very small yard. She was on a half of 2 lots, like on a street over here on the west side of town. And so she was up by the alley, and she had a young kid and about maybe a 4-year-old boy, and she fenced her yard in, and the fence contractor went a little bit too close to the street. So it was on the right of way, but it was not near, it was far enough away from the street. And it really kind of fell into our criteria for an obstruction permit. It was really a good candidate for that. And when I walked up there, the little boy looked at me and he said, "Are you gonna make us tear down our fence?" This little 3-4-year-old guy, big brown eyes. I said, "I hope not. We'll try to figure something out." And that was a case where it was far enough from the street. It didn't interfere with the use of the street for cars. I think we say like 7 feet. There were no utilities there, and it was on a very small lot, and there was a perfect candidate for an encroachment permit. So we just did that. But we do have them provide we record them, and then we have them provide a certificate of insurance so that, because if there's an obstruction on a city right of way and the city knows about it and somebody runs into it, the city may have some liability. So we do have the certificate of insurance too.
We're talking about easements. It makes me think, an easement is there for the purpose of being able to service the utilities, whether it's this year or 10 years from now. And technically, when you live in town, you own the property to the center of the street. And you own to the center of the easement, but just the same, I think of like my house. I have a 60-foot easement, which is 500 feet long. That gives me access to my house from my 2 neighbors. And they have to each give up 30 feet of property. And if they put a fence out to the middle of the easement, it'd be down the middle of my driveway. And it'd be no different than putting it in on an easement. It's just the way things are.
Okay, so we've got our proposal here, and we're going to take easement off of 92.075. Is that kind of the thinking, or do you want to leave that on?
I'm fine with that. I think we're covering it over here in utilities, and I think that's kind of the whole primary purpose.
Okay. And then, is there any other verbiage that we want to add, kind of,
That last paragraph on Shakopee that you had mentioned is a good way to set a standard of where non-emergency, give them the opportunity to take care of it, but this is what happens if there is an emergency, because it needs to be done.
in the Shakopee?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Is everybody fine with that?
Yeah,
Adding that Shakopee, the last
Very
paragraph from
fine.
Shakopee there?
very easily read, understandable.
There are also some comments on the East Grand Forks one. There were those two.
Right.
Do they,
Whoa. You're saying under easements, you can't do this in an easement. And now you're saying over here, well, if you do it, fine, we'll try and give you warning, you gotta move it. You can't have it both ways. It's either one way or the other. Either they can't put anything in the easement, or you're gonna allow them something in the easement, you're gonna tell them ahead of time to move it.
I think this says that if there is something there, we're gonna ask you to move it politely and get it out of the way. But if you don't move it, we're gonna move it for you, and it's gonna be at your expense, whether or not it's allowed to be there.
Right, and I would envision that being the case, you know, whether there's a need for access right at that time or not. So if we're aware of an obstruction, we would probably notify them, give them a certain amount of time to remove it. But if they don't, you know, then it's,
We go in and,
right, because otherwise people could pile stuff all over the easement area, and then we'd have to give them 10 days and, you know, whatever. So I could see that becoming, I think this is more of a situation where we become aware of it and we can give them notice.
okay, I understand.
how about that East Grand Forks language? Was that,
Yeah, I like that for just clarification.
so incorporate, so the, leave the 92 section alone, the obstructions piece, but in the easement part of 15142, add the obstructions and fences and structures, and then incorporate the final paragraph from Shakopee and the language of the two paragraphs from East Grand Forks.
Yeah, that's just where the city has the right to keep all utility easements free from hazard structures and other improvements which might hinder the city's ability to serve and maintain such utilities. And if you are building a fence or structure and you plan on planting a tree, please be advised that no fence or structure can be built in. And we could probably even, you know, let them know without permission from the city or without seeking an encroachment permit.
Sure. Then at least that is that.
Okay, what is our next step then?
Yeah, if you guys are fine with that, we could put together an RCA and
Okay,
bring it to council.
You'd call for a
Hearing?
hearing, and that would be held at the May Planning Commission meeting, and it would go to the city council at the following council meeting. If you wanna wait until the May one to review the language and call for it then, that's an option too.
commission? You wanna just call for a hearing, and when we get the language, we can do the final finessing of it? Okay,
Sounds good.
That's good.
okay. Call for a hearing, do we have a motion to call for a hearing?
Motion?
Have a motion,
I'll second it.
second, okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, item 5, others. Do we have others?
No others.
No others?
No others.
No others?
No others.
It's nice to see the hospital coming down so quickly and
Yeah, it is
Looking
pretty
good.
nice, yeah, yeah. There, you will see a, preliminary plat coming through for approval and a partial rezoning on that, hopefully at the May Planning Commission meeting.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's progress. Could give you just a quick, maybe a quick housing update if you're interested.
Why not?
So the multifamily stuff, the Angle project by Valley Home, that one is, he's struggling to make that one come together. He's kind of pivoting a little bit on the mixed use and talking about just 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 multifamily potentially, and he's reworking his numbers based on that. If that's the case, then we're gonna have to go back to a rezoning on that, because it was rezoned from multifamily to commercial to allow to C2 to allow the commercial mixed use under the multifamily, so, I guess more to come on that one.
He won't get the TIF then if he's not gonna have part of it for childcare, right?
Well, the city council okayed that as long as there was a, deed restriction that would hold part of that property for daycare, which the city council could release at any time, if he requested it and if they felt that was justified. There's some other pretty positive daycare activity going on right near there that could alleviate that, so.
With Valley Home being almost empty right now, have people thought about having daycare in that building?
Very much so. It's being looked at real serious right now,
Okay.
so.
There's a really neat facility in Mankato that does that. It's memory care, senior living with a daycare incorporated,
Mhm.
and it's awesome for both sides.
Yeah, that intergenerational thing,
Yeah.
it helps with a lot of depression things for the residents, and yeah, it's a pretty cool solution, and it's got some really good momentum right now.
You're gonna rent space like is it Baudette or Lake of the Woods or whatever in the school there where they rent out spaces to individuals?
Pods,
Okay.
yep.
Mhm.
That wouldn't be the case in this one, but that's being looked at other ones too. So,
Warren is building Fort Warren, a big facility.
Warren, the city of Warren is building a big facility, and they actually passed, I believe, a sales, or they're probably getting approval now from the legislature for a
It's
sales
passed.
tax. Did it pass?
Yeah.
So they're doing it with a sales tax to make their debt service payments. Yeah. So, the Gracewind Senior Housing Co-op site, that one, because of a deed restriction of the adjacent property that the developer owns, he had to suspend the senior living thing there, which is kind of too bad, because that was a really nice project. But, so he is also pivoting, and he's looking at probably just doing a apartment building there, not senior.
There's no option for him to try to have the deed restriction removed, or I don't know.
He's tried.
Okay.
Yeah, the holders of it don't want to release it. He owns the land, but the deed restriction came with it. And the only way he could fit what he wanted to do on there was to put the parking underground, which added so much cost to it that it drove the cost up for the buyers, so.
How long does that deed restriction last for?
I think it's stated as 40 years, that particular one,
Oh, wow.
so.
Is it 20 years old already though?
Yeah, probably close to that, maybe not quite, but there's some time left on it, yeah. It just states that it's gotta be, commercial use, which is what the property is zoned for. So he needed to rezone that south strip 50 feet or so as, multifamily, but it was tied up with the deed restriction, so.
It's really nice to have the Canadian Rail building down over there. It just
Yeah, it really
looks
cleaned it
cleaner
up.
and neater
Yeah.
and
Remind me. Talk to you right after we get done here. Yeah.
We had another developer that was looking at, I want to say it was probably 8 40-unit buildings, I think it was, on East Greenwood Street, some property that Bill Ness used to own, a developer from Grand Forks, and he was to the point of applying for building permit plans. Everything were ready, and he bid the project, and it was just too cost prohibitive, and that was probably 18 months ago or so, maybe 2 years ago. So he didn't know what he was going to do, and I had a call from him about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he's revisiting that project and thinks maybe he could make that project work. So that's another one that's
which property was that?
that's on the south side of East Greenwood Street, almost to the river.
Okay.
So that one's a possibility. So, so anyway, there's, and then Pace's Lodging is potentially ready to go with their 2 more buildings like they have already south of Walmart. So there's 5 potential multifamily projects that could happen, or 5, I mean 4 different owners, but 2 buildings by Walmart and
One by Walmart, how is he doing with occupancy rate?
You know, I just talked to them 3 weeks ago and asked that question, and they rarely have any open. They had 2 open right now, but it's because they had like 6 people moving out, and then 4 of them backfilled immediately off a waiting list, and then they still had, because they had 6 people move out at once is why they said it's the only reason they had 2 open right now, but they said they've been 100% full.
Yeah, they stay full. My son lives in that
Okay.
building.
Yeah, they're pretty nice.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me if, there's a huge need for a decent apartment with, that 2-car garage.
2-car garage is a nice plus, yeah,
Mhm.
yep. So they're pretty nice, so, so that's the multifamily activity going on.
Is there much single-family activity going on?
Not really. There's a few things happening though. There's so the NWRDC out of Warren is doing a kind of a housing study, kind of northwest Minnesota, and they did a phase 1, and now they're going to do a phase 2 that's going to actually interview people at Articat and DigiKey and try to understand what people are looking for and what they can spend, and so that's going on. City of Thief River is potentially doing another housing study. The last one they did was 2012, and really got some pretty good mileage out of that one. And but it has, its lifespan is spent now, and it really would have been a few years ago, but because the progress was good, it felt like it wasn't really appropriate to spend the energy and money doing another one. So so I just got some, I'll talk to committee tomorrow night about that, but we did just get a quote for a new housing study and have a commitment from the Northwest Minnesota Foundation to pay for most of it, or a big part of it. So so that'll probably happen. And there's a group actually talking to the Administrative Services Committee tonight. The Grand Forks Land Trust and the Northwest Minnesota Foundation are kind of partnering, and the Northwest Minnesota Foundation wants to have a community land trust here, which is basically that group owns the land, and then they would apply for some deed impact funds for supplementing some gap funding for the projects. They'd like to build about 4 of them in town. They always own the land. The homeowner, which has some income restrictions, but they're not terrible. I think they're 115% of statewide median income, which is a lot higher than the county. And so it gets somebody up, a little over, say a family of 2 people or 4 people would be, over $100,000, maybe $120,000 a year, 119 something I think it is. So, and they'd be proposing to build, their target would be like a 1,800 square foot home with 2-car attached garage, and then the way it works with that, because they hold, it's kind of complicated, but because they hold the land, if somebody buys that home, and they're kind of buying down their purchase price with some of those grant dollars and not having to charge them for the land, so that helps. Then when that person goes to sell the house, they can only keep 25% of the appreciation. So let's say that they paid $200,000 for the house, and then let's say that in 5 years they wanted to sell it, and say it was worth $300,000. So then what they would do is they would, see if I can get this straight. So what they would do is then they would take 25% of that appreciation, so I used a simple number so I wouldn't get mixed up here. So $25,000 they could keep, and then the community land trust would basically absorb the rest of it to buy it down for, it really wouldn't, they wouldn't get that extra money, they would only get that 25%, so then the house would still be affordable for the next person to come and buy it.
Does then the next owner get the land and everything then?
Nope.
So would that, so that housing then would stay income restricted for
Yeah,
quite a while, or
Yeah,
until
yeah.
at some point it would,
for the people, as they
Follow
qualified
that,
to get
right.
into it, yeah, they'd have to qualify to get into it. But yeah, the community land trust would always own the land.
yeah.
And then, you know, it's kind of interesting, one thing, let's say they wanted to build another garage, you know, in the backyard or something, and they spend $30,000 on that. So if that's a documented expense, then that would not be subject to their, that would go on top of the base price, so their 25% would be, they wouldn't be hurt by that, so they could still
What are your
benefit from
financing
that.
on that?
Well, they're talking about potentially local banks, but I don't know if any of the local ones are into that right now, but some of the bigger ones do. And otherwise, like
So if they had to
USDA maybe,
foreclose on it, what would happen?
the lender would have rights to the house, but the land would still be owned by the community land trust.
So basically, it's similar to like in bigger markets where there's a huge apartment building and you own your apartment, you don't rent your apartment, but yet
Mhm.
you don't own the building. So you just own a piece of this building.
Yeah,
So it'd be kind of like that. 'cause
kind of
they
like
could-
that, yeah.
An
You-
association?
Yeah, except that
Yeah.
you'd have, you basically lease it from the land trust,
Mhm.
the ground, so, for a pretty minimal fee. So their idea is, and I don't know, that's maybe one of the challenges here, because land isn't all that expensive, why they tend to maybe work better in Rochester, Duluth, or someplace where the lots are a lot more money, because that, you know, but it's something, so.
And wasn't there that rental rehab that we're trying to get a grant on?
Yeah, we did. The city got a $600,000 grant for multifamily rehab. And it'll help improve, I think it was 44 units. And,
And it sounds like they've got them all signed up.
yep, so they sent out, what we did is gave them sent a letter out about that to every building owner that had a building that was older than, we used 25 years old, and then asked for them to respond with their interest and their letter of intent, and there was enough units to fill that and then some, so I think some of your old ones might be part of that.
Which ones?
The Gunderson one, probably.
Dave Bray?
Yeah, I think that one is, I think that might be one of them.
I don't know where you, yeah.
No, anyway, that's happening. That's a good program. Cities utilize that small cities program a few different times before, and it's been good. It's a combination of low interest loan and deferred forgivable loans, so, I think that's kind of the. I
And the
guess
funding
kind-
from that comes from the state.
State, yeah, Minnesota deed. Then there's also a couple large property developers that have large parcels that are contemplating platting and public infrastructure. One of them is south of the elementary addition, south of Challenger, the 40 acres south of what's developed there now. MMCDC has 20 acres to the east of that they're at some point gonna wanna develop. And then the guy that purchased the property south of First Street, west of Countryside Mobile Home Court, that piece between Technology and First Street and the Mobile Home Court and the county bypass, that's 48 acres, and that one is well teed up for development. That one, so the city, secured the option to purchase on that Noper property, and we had that strategically laid out into 4 phases that kind of made sense with the streets and utilities to get those in. We got some different grants. We got a local transportation improvement grant to do First Street. We got a deed workforce housing grant to do Ruby Avenue and a portion of First Street. And then we got a deed BDP or BDPI grant to put in Technology Street as part of the Digi-Key expansion. So that property got really well prepared. The water and sewer is stubbed out at the intersections. We actually have a water main loop on, I always call it Randall Avenue, Randall Noper, but that one's not platted or named yet. That's, that's the furthest street. It's probably about 300 feet east of the bypass, north and
Okay.
south. That has a water main loop on it. So you probably remember many times when there was valve issues and that, having to shut the water off, and you guys were out of water for
Oh, yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, now that main is looped, so there's, that's a lot better situation than it used to be.
Sure, yeah.
And, a lot of things came together on that. So because the holding capacity of that 48 acres, if it was multifamily, is like, it's over 800 homes, like 850 housing units in apartments. The state Water Quality Board requires environmental review, environmental either worksheet or study if it's more than 500 homes. So because that site had that capacity, but the city had a lot of good planning work done, so it actually qualified for it's called a ARAU, in between a worksheet and a full-blown study, so it saved a little bit of time. And Digi-Key's expansion of a warehouse of that magnitude also required the environmental review. So we asked Digi-Key if because they had to do it on that site anyway, their site, and because they support housing, we said, would you guys consider including that future housing site in your environmental review for your expansion? So they said, yeah, we'll go along with that. So they paid for that,
Okay.
and the upcharge for that, and then the options that were looked at on that were either all of it as multifamily or almost all of multifamily, but one row of commercial along the county highway. So the west, say 300 feet, that was one option, was commercial there. So anyway, that one, somebody could come to the planning commission with a plat and with intent to do all multifamily there that would have 800 plus units, and the city would be okay to authorize that to move ahead because that environmental review has already been completed, so.
And the way they keep lobbing on more environmental requirements, having it done now is better than trying to do it later.
Yeah, the latest one coming up is the social environmental, where a lot of development, say industrial type stuff, has been in bigger cities where it's near areas of low income residents. So the social injustice is that the low income residents are subject to the byproducts of the industrial use, kind of unjust. So that's a big thing they're talking about right now. And I was just on a webinar today with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities and Greater Minnesota Partnership, and they were talking about, it was an update on the legislative things, and that was one of them that was talked about. And then the ones I was most interested in, my computer did an automatic restart, and I lost a few minutes of getting the information. But one of those areas, and I didn't catch which one it was because of that, is the state is going to add a department, and they need to hire like 300 people to administer some of these new regulations. So anyway, one other thing is interesting on housing. And I was going to get something together for you guys on this, but I couldn't really find anything that was really abbreviated, and it was like 380 pages. But I was part of part of a housing panel at St. Cloud State here a couple weeks ago, and there was a guy from Rochester that was there, and one of their planning guys, and Rochester, which is something that's happening more so in bigger communities, but they're changing a lot of their zoning regulations where they can, they're not restricting as much where housing can go, because there's such a deficit of housing there that they're just like, you know, they're getting away from governing minimum sizes of homes. They're getting away from keeping them out of commercial areas because they just wanna, they're just trying to do everything they can to get housing. So
That's
they-
happening a lot in the cities.
Yes, yep, it's not uncommon anymore. So, I don't know if it's gonna hit here yet, but, I know MMCDC is interested in seeing if there's a way to allow a little bit smaller homes here than what our 950 square foot requirement is. That could be a conversation coming up at some point too.
The, what do they call them, the mini homes or park models,
Tiny homes?
tiny homes?
I don't think he's quite to the tiny home, but I think, you know, maybe instead of the 950 square feet, maybe it's 750, maybe it's 800, I'm not sure what, but I know he wants to have a conversation about that at some point. And maybe that's something that would be a conditional use permit too, you know.
Yeah, that gets pretty small about January.
Well, that was a lot of other for no other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
All you need room for is a recliner and a TV set.
Yeah, that's right.
and you'll probably be divorced, you really only need one recliner.
So you gotta have room for your dog. Okay, but no others?
No.
Del Rey, do you have any other
Nope.
updates for us?
So we'll get something put together.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Perfect, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries anonymously. Let's go enjoy the
Nice
evening.
weather.
Beautiful day out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
outside.
I think of your kids as.
did I just know this isn't gonna last?
Yeah, not so much.
No, it's gonna be raining on,
Saturday or something, Friday?
Is graduating this year.
Steve's got a
When
large house
is it
in
gonna rain
today.
there, Mr. Berquist?
They started their meeting at 7 this morning.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
Hey, Del Rey, so you were
anybody
taking
buying that
notes
lumberyard?
there, do you wanna,
Put some
do you wanna
lumberyard in
jiggle
there
this
yet?
up?
I know.
Can
Anybody
you
know
email
what
me that over
Well, you
as
know,
soon as you
I
get
was
it
gonna
done?
ask about that.
Sounds good.
I'm, you know, for me,
I
I'm
got
trying to
a
pick the
request
days that works
Kinda
out,
like the
so
age of
the
justice,
sooner the
and then
better.
Megan
I
has
don't think the
little
RCA
ones
has
now.
any
Yeah.
notice
He
of
wouldn't
that.
tell me
Well,
anything.
try to do it tomorrow when
They
it's
wanna,
over.
they wanna,
If I forget, then it
fiber
just
connection
languishes.
to the building.
Okay.
And we have one already, and they
You
want
got
to
something, Ashley's
different
gone.
stuff, and I closed them on the speed. But I said, who's